Peace be upon all of you. If you watched the previous video, you will remember that I said that I will be discussing who did John refer to as the great prostitute at the beginning of chapter 17, starting from verse 1. I will read to you what John said in chapter 17, starting from verse 1, where he says, "Then one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls came and said to me, 'Come, I will show you the judgment of the great prostitute, who is seated on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have engaged in prostitution, and with the wine of whose prostitution the inhabitants of the earth have become drunk.' So he carried me away in the spirit into a wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was full of blasphemous names, and it had 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was clothed in purple and scarlet and adorned with gold and jewels and pearls, holding in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and the impurities of her prostitution. And on her forehead was written a name, a mystery: Babylon the great, mother of prostitutes and of earth abominations. And I saw that the woman was drunk with the blood of the saints and the blood of the witnesses to Jesus." Now from verse 6, which I just finished reading, he says, "And I saw that the woman was drunk with the blood of the saints and the blood of the witnesses to Jesus." Now this tells us all that the Babylon that John is talking about here is not the old Babylon where the Israelites were taken into captivity in Persia hundreds of years before that or more. He's talking about a new city, a mystery. He says it's a mystery. And angel in later in the prophecy, he tells him, I will tell you the mystery of the woman. So this woman is not the old Babylon, it's a new Babylon. He calls her Babylon because of the sins, because of the abominations. He said that she's distributing, or so it's not the old Babylon. Okay, so who did John describe as the new Babylon, the great mother of prostitutes? To know, we have to read the description of the fall of Babylon, and out of that we can find out who John was referring to as the great prostitute. If you go to chapter 18, which is called the fall of Babylon, and you read, and I cannot read the whole thing because it takes a very long time. I will take some sections of it and I will read them for you. If you look at verse 3, he says, "For all the nations have fallen from the wine of the wrath of her prostitution." Then in verse 4 he says, "Come out of her, my people, so that you do not partake in her sins, and so that you do not share in her plagues." Now this in this part, when God is talking, the only nation that God called my people are the Israelite nation. And here it says, "Come out of here, my people, out of the great city," which I believe he is referring to Jerusalem, because to any Jew, the great city is Jerusalem. It's not Babylon or any other place. But I'm going to continue reading the description because I want you to see the entire description of the great prostitute. In verse 7, he says, as she glorified herself and lived luxuriously, so give her a like measure of torment and grief, since in her heart she says, I rule as a queen. I am no widow, and I will never see grief. Okay. In verse 9, John says, Allah's the great city, Babylon the mighty city. He's referring to her as Babylon because of the sins and because of what happened to the Israelites in Babylon. For in 1 hour your judgment has come. Okay, and then we go to verse 16. He says, Allah's the great city, clothed in fine linen, in purple and scarlet, adorned with gold, with jewels and with pearls. For in 1 hour all this wealth has been laid waste. And then he says in verse 18, what city was like the great city? And then he goes on to say in verse 20, rejoice over her, O heaven, you saints and apostles and prophets, for God has condemned her condemnation of you. Then he goes to verse 23 and he says, and the light of a lamp will shine in you no more, and the voice of the bridegroom and bride will be heard in you no more. Then he goes to verse, for you, I'm going to jump into verse 24 because it sums up everything. And he says, and in her, meaning the new great city, the new Babylon, and in her was found the blood of prophets and of saints and of all who have been slaughtered on earth. Now, to find who John was referring to, let me read you some quotes from Israelite prophets that came before. If you look at Ezekiel 16, 8 to 17, it talks about God talking to the Israelite nation. And I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm going to read you parts of it. It's from verse 1 to verse 14. He says, I passed by you, meaning the Israelite nation, again and looked at you. You were at the age for love. Then I bathed you with water and washed off the blood from you and anointed you with oil. That's the nation of Israel. That's God talking. I clothed you with embroidered cloth and with sandals and of fine leather. I bound you in fine linen and covered you with rich fabric. Then he goes on to say, you were adorned with gold and silver, while your clothing was of fine linen, rich fabric and embroidered cloth. You had choice flour and honey and oil for food. You grew exceedingly beautiful. God tells the Israelite nation, you grew exceedingly beautiful, fit to be a queen. So John says, for in your heart you say, I am a queen, I'm no widow. I believe he's referring to this, where God says you had choice flour and honey and oil for food. You grew exceedingly beautiful, fit to be a queen. Your fame spread among the nations. And then in verse 15, Ezekiel says that God says, but you trusted in your beauty and prostituted yourself because of your fame and lavished your prostitution on many passerbys. So this is where I believe John was referring to the nation of Israel but being the queen, where he says, I'm a queen and I'm not going to see grief in his description of the fall of Babylon. Now, when you read in Jeremiah chapter 3, starting from verse 1, God is speaking here according to Jeremiah. He says, if a man divorces his wife and she goes from him and becomes another man's wife, will he return to her? Would not such a land be greatly polluted? You have prostituted yourself with many lovers, and would you return to me? So the idea of God being the husband and the Israelites being his wife who prostituted herself is found in many places in the Old Testament. I'll read you more, so you will see why I think John was referring to Jerusalem and to the nation of Israel when he talked about the great prostitute, or the mystery Babylon, the great prostitute. If you look at Luke chapter 11, he says, woe to you, because you built tombs for the prophets, and it was your ancestors who killed them. So you testify that you approve of what your ancestors did. They killed the prophets and you built their tombs. Because of this, God in his wisdom said, I will send them prophets and apostles, some of whom they will kill and others they will persecute. Therefore, this generation will be held responsible for the blood of all the prophets that has been shed since the beginning of the world. That's why John in Revelation, I believe that John in Revelation, he says that in here was found, like here, he says, rejoice over here, O heaven, you saints and apostles and prophets, for God has condemned her condemnation of you. So he wants the apostles and the prophets to rejoice over her because he believes, she's responsible for their death. And in verse 24 of chapter 17, he says, and in her was found the blood of prophets and of saints and of all who have been slaughtered on earth. Meaning, the same as in Luke, where he says, therefore this generation will be held responsible for the blood of all the prophets that has been shed since the beginning of the world, from the blood of Abel, who is the son of Adam, the first human being, to the blood of Zechariah, who was killed between the altar and the sanctuary. So this is another place where I think John was referring to when he was talking about the great prostitute. If you look at Matthew, the same thing, Matthew 23:37, where Jesus is quoted as saying, Jerusalem, O Jerusalem, you who kill the prophets and stone those sent to you, how often I have longed to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, and you were not willing. Look, your house is left to you desolate. For I tell you, you will not see me again until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. So, we go to 1 Kings 19:14. Starting from verse 14 in 1 Kings 19, he replied, that's Elijah, I have been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant, torn down your altars, and put your prophets to death with the sword. I am the only one left, and now they are trying to kill me too. So Nehemiah, Prophet Nehemiah, In chapter 9, 26, he says, but they were disobedient and rebelled against you, meaning against God. They turned their backs on your law. They killed your prophets who had warned them. In order to turn them back to you, they committed awful blasphemies. So the cup that is full of blasphemies, according to John in the book of Revelation, I believe is mentioned before by Nehemiah. Now, if you look at the Holy Quran, and I'm quoting from the translation of Muslim scholar. His name is Abdullah Yusuf Ali. He says in chapter 2, verse 87, he translates the Quran. He says, we gave Moses the book and followed him up with a succession of messengers. We gave Jesus, the Son of Mary, clear signs and strengthened him with the Holy Spirit. Is it that whenever there comes to you a messenger with what ye yourselves desire not, ye are puffed up with pride? Some ye called impostors, and others ye slay. So the idea that the Israelite nation killed the prophets is found in Judaism, Christianity, and in Islam. And that's why the description of the fall of Babylon, where I quoted John as saying that, like in the first quote is in verse 6 in chapter 17, where he says, and I saw that the woman was drunk with the blood of the saints and the blood of the witnesses to Jesus. Here he's talking about the early persecution of the early believers in Jesus, whom were tortured and killed by Paul and the high priest. And he calls the followers of Jesus as the saints and the witnesses to Jesus. Then in the fall of Babylon, and where he says, rejoice over here, O heaven, you saints and apostles and prophets, for God has condemned her condemnation of you. Meaning, the Israelite nation condemned these prophets and apostles, and God is going to condemn her for that. And then in verse 24, and in here was found the blood of prophets and of saints and of all who have been slaughtered on earth. So I believe that John was referring to the nation of Israel when he was talking about the great prostitute. Now, to tie things together, as I said I will do for you before, if you look at the prophecy, it says that the prostitute is sitting on 7 heads and 10 horns. And I'll read it for you from the prophecy. So he carried me away in the spirit into a wilderness, that's verse 3, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was full of blasphemous names, and it had 7 heads and 10 horns. The 7 heads that the prostitute, according to John, is sitting on, the 7 heads are the 7 Israelite prophets, whom we talked about in the second video. And you can find that where he says, this calls for a mind that has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman is seated. The Israelite nation, I said before, and I say it again, the Israelite nation is sitting on 7 great prophets who were also kings. She's sitting on them, meaning she is established on them. Abraham, Isaac, Joseph, Moses, David, Solomon, and Jesus. That's what he believes. She is sitting on 7 mountains. When in the Semitic language, when you say this man is a mountain, it means he's a great man. He's well established, he's strong, he is confident, he's a mountain. I mean, when you call somebody, this man stands like a mountain, it means he's tough, strong, and nothing can shake him. And that's why the prophecy says this calls for a mind of wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman is seated. Also, they are also 7 kings. So they have to be prophets and kings, and that's what we explained before. And I showed why the 5 that have fallen, where it says 5 of whom 5 have fallen. One is living, and the other has not yet come, and when he comes, he will only stay a little while. The 5 that have fallen, I said, were Abraham, Isaac, Joseph, David, and Solomon, because they did not establish a religion. They have fallen. They have no religion. One is, and that is Moses. He brought the law of God, and he established the religion of Judaism, or the religion of Judaism was established based on it. The one that stayed a little while, I said, was Jesus. And I explained why. Because at the end of the book of Revelation, it says he's coming back. Right? Then the prophecy goes on, because I promised to tie things together. It says, as for the beast that was and is not, it is an 8th. It doesn't say it's an 8th king. All it says, as for the beast that was and is not, it's an 8th. It's a number 8. The beast is a number 8. But it belongs to the 7, and it goes to destruction. So this 8th will belong to the 7 Israelite prophets. And to tell you who it is, I will say that I believe that the 8th was Saul or Saint Paul, and I'll show you in the next video, like I said, because I cannot go on now with why I believe he was, but I'll show it to you and I'll prove it to you in the next video, because I don't want to make this video very, very long. So the Israelite nation was sitting on 7 heads and 7 kings. The 8th is the beast, and I will show you who the beast was, and I told you who I think it is, and I'll show it to you in the next video. Now, peace be upon all of you again. Wassalamu alaikum. I will talk to you in the next video.